All right, today we're going to dive into what is, without a doubt, one of the most talked about, debated, and frankly divisive chapters in the entire New Testament, 1 Timothy chapter 2. So let's get into it.
I mean, just think about it for a second. This one chapter has had a huge impact on church structure, on gender roles, on how people worship, and it's been that way for centuries. But the real question is, why? What is it about this short passage from an ancient letter that still sparks such fiery debate today?
So the whole chapter of 1 Timothy 2 is basically a set of instructions for worship. But really, at the absolute heart of all the controversy, the part that causes all the friction, is just a single line about the role of women when the church gets together.
And there it is, verse 12. You could say these are the words that sit right at the epicenter of a theological earthquake. Now, to understand one very prominent and influential way of looking at this, we're going to turn to the work of Dr. Robert Yarbrough, who's a scholar of these particular letters in the Bible.
But here's the thing. Before we can even get into those controversial verses, Dr. Yarbrough says, hold on. We first have to understand the lens that he believes you have to look through to even make sense of them. And for him, it all comes down to a really basic question about the authority of the Bible itself.
Yarbrough really frames this whole discussion as a clash between two totally different worldviews. On one side, you've got what he calls the biblical view. That's the idea that male and female distinctions are not just random, but are a fundamental part of God's good design. Then, on the other side, you have what he calls a modern cultural view, which he suggests often sees gender more as a social construct and traditional norms as something to be challenged or rejected. And this is the absolute key to his whole interpretation. Your starting point determines your destination. Yarbrough is basically arguing that whether or not you see the Bible's teaching on gender as the final word for the church today is going to completely shape how you read everything else in this chapter.
Okay, so with that foundation set, let's actually dig into the text. Yarbrough really emphasizes that you can't just parachute into verse 12 all by itself. The entire chapter has one big unifying theme that gives us the context we need. It's all about instructions on worship.
You know, the chapter doesn't kick off with controversy. Not at all. It starts with this powerful command to pray. And not just for some people, it says to pray for everyone, especially for kings and leaders. And what's the goal? Well, the text says it's so that believers can live peaceful lives, creating a stable society where the Christian message can actually spread.
So this brings us to a really critical point in Yarbrough's argument. He says that before you get to any discussion about roles or conduct, the non-negotiable foundation is a community that is actually in communion with God. For him, the question, is this church a praying church, is way more important than anything else.
Okay, so keeping that whole context of a prayerful worship service in mind, the text then pivots. It starts giving some specific instructions for how men and women should conduct themselves. And yeah, this is where we start getting into the details that spark so much of the debate.
Yarbrough interprets this part as Paul addressing what he sees as potential gender-specific tendencies that could really disrupt worship. For the men, he points out the instruction is to pray without getting angry or argumentative, a potential pitfall. And for the women, the focus shifts to dressing modestly and focusing on good deeds, which he sees as addressing a different kind of potential distraction from worship.
Then we hit verse 11. Now, it's often read with all the weight on quietness and submission. But Yarbrough points to the original Greek and notes that the main verb here, learn, is actually an imperative. It's a direct command. So he argues the real emphasis isn't on the way she learns, but on the command that she must learn.
And in his view, this is just revolutionary. I mean, in a first-century world, formal religious teaching was often a men-only club. So for the text to flat-out command, let a woman learn, well, that was a radical act of inclusion. It was establishing women as true disciples, as serious students of the faith, right there alongside the men.
So now, when we come back to verse 12, it lands immediately after that powerful, inclusive command for women to learn, and according to Yarbrough's reading, this timing, this immediate context is absolutely crucial for understanding the restriction that comes right after it.
So what does it mean to teach or assume authority over a man? In Yarbrough's view, this isn't some blanket ban on women teaching in any situation. He argues it refers to a very specific official role, the formal pastoral office that's responsible for the main teaching and spiritual leadership of the entire congregation. But why? Why would that specific role be limited? Well, the text itself gives a reason. And Yarbrough explains that this reasoning isn't based on the local culture in Ephesus, but on something way more fundamental, the theological story of creation and the fall in the book of Genesis.
The author of 1 Timothy lays out the rationale very clearly by pointing back to that Genesis story. The sequence of events is presented as being really significant. Adam was formed first, then Eve. And then, crucially, the text notes that it was Eve who was deceived first, which led into the first sin.
So according to Yarbrough, the text uses this specific sequence of events from Genesis to explain the reason for a particular division of labor in church leadership. He sees it as a structure that's rooted directly in the Bible's account of creation's original order and humanity's fall.
Now, Yarbrough tends to avoid words like hierarchy. Instead, he suggests a different framework. He calls it ordered relational synergy. The idea here isn't about a structure of power and who's on top, but it's a vision for a beautiful, complementary partnership where men and women are seen to serve together in distinct, God-designed roles that create a powerful synergy.
And so this particular interpretation presents a really cohesive, if still controversial, reading of a difficult text. It's all rooted in a specific view of biblical authority and the creation story. And it leaves us all with the fundamental question that every reader has to grapple with. How should we take ancient texts about order, worship, and gender and apply them in our modern world?